second, if I could invite over Mohammad Choucair to the stage. Mohammad is CEO of Archer Materials. Mohammad, if you can hear me, if you can join us. Yeah, there we go. Excellent. Good morning, Mohammad. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks. I know you love your polls.
Yeah. So what do you think, Mohammad? Is now a good time to buy?
I can't answer that, right?
All right. Excellent. Well, Mohammad, we're talking today. You will be talking today about one of the things is quantum computing, and obviously the holy grail is quantum computing at room temperature. I get excited just thinking about that. So without further ado, I'll hand the floor over to you to jump straight in, and we've got some question time afterwards. So anyone, if you've got a question for Mohammad, just type it in the chat on the right hand side of your screen. And with that, I'll hand over to Mohammad.
Thanks, Mark. Well, I mean, I know you mentioned the word global and semiconductor in the one sentence, but today I wanted to introduce you all to the global scale of opportunity that our technology represents, and to really give you an overview of the wonderful work Archer is doing in this domain, and really the way we're going about doing this work, and why, as a consequence of this work, Archer, I believe, is worthy of your attention and your consideration. Here is an image of where we operate out of mostly here in Sydney. It's a semiconductor research and prototyping foundry. It costs about $150 million to build. But the one thing I will say is the images that you see in our presentation today are all of Archer's staff, our materials, the facilities we access. There's one, I think, in the presentation that we use with permission from IBM. But look, before I go on, I think there is, considering the speakers today and the semiconductor industry in general, I think, as Mark touched upon, there is a need to differentiate Archer from other groups in the semiconductor sector. The only similarity between Archer and the others in this important sector is the word semiconductor. Other than that, we're in completely different arenas. And this is because Archer is developing a quantum chip, and really the only company on the ASX doing so, and in fact, indeed one of only a few in the world doing so. And technologically at Archer, we do have a unique value proposition that holds up as a world first, and that we're building a qubit processor that could potentially allow for quantum computation at room temperature and onboard modern devices. It's important to take these two facets together because this, for quantum computing, is an astounding proposition and an important distinction to make, I believe. It's one that we can really back up with years of R&D. And yes, we've already started building our technology. And yes, we work in world-class facilities. And yes, we work with some of the brightest minds to do it. And indeed, with undoubted leaders in computing like IBM to demonstrate that our technology works. And it's important, to really share with you our vision. And it's a really simple one. And that's to make quantum computing accessible. The era of quantum being pie in the sky is over, right? And I just want to let you know that we believe that our growth is really not a result of overnight success, right? It is a result of the quality of work we're doing, the quality of people at Archer, and the quality of the organizations we work with. In 2021, Archer was a company in transition. And today, I will really focus my talk on our flagship quantum computing technology. But I think it would be remiss of me if I don't really go over the year that has been, right? I mean, it's been a very special year for Archer. And really the undoubted highlights of 2021 were in the granting of our patents, the technology advances we made, our commercial partnerships, and expanding our access to the deep tech infrastructure we need to develop our technologies. The granting of our patents this year related to our 12CQ quantum computing qubit process, that's what we call it, 12CQ. It was an important achievement. We had our patents granted in Japan, South Korea, China, and the US. This is so important for us because quantum computing is not a fast follower industry. For Archer to participate in the global semiconductor industry, we must have patent protection in the largest economies in the world. We must protect our commercial interests that would potentially allow us to exploit the technology over the long term. And patents are one possible way that allows us to do that. And the reality is, all that aside, we're one of few companies in the world in the semiconductor industry with a patent portfolio protecting quantum computing chip technology. Let's get into it, right? I mean, quantum computing, what is it all about? Why is it so revolutionary? And, really, is it that believable? I think, really the first question to answer, and I'll stay on this slide for a little while, is how is quantum computing different to modern day computing? I mean, you see a lot of talks today from different organizations, and you look at the semiconductor industry as a whole. But really, I can sum it up by saying that quantum computing is a whole new way of computing. It requires a new set of skills and new technology. We're not building a modern Boolean logic silicon-based transistor processor that does quantum, right? We are now entering the world of quantum logic. Computing really is silently undergoing a revolution. But look, it's important to note that quantum computing is not envisioned to throw out your modern day computing, quite the contrary. However, this new way of computing requires a critical piece of technology, a device. And this device is called a qubit processor. And I'll just refer to this as a quantum chip. And at the heart of this chip, we're really going down to the fundamentals here, is a qubit. And qubits come in different forms, which means no one quantum chip, and in that regard, quantum computer, is necessarily the same. And unlike modern computers that are based on silicon and use transistors and the like, where you get different devices for different things, qubits in a similar way, right? The qubits used really act as a way to limit the scope of the quantum machines that are built, both technologically and I would go as far as to say commercially. It takes years, to develop the technology required for quantum computing. This is not something that you just get up and make in 6 months, right? It really is a technology that is drawing the attention of our governments, of organizations around the world. And if there's ever been a time for people to really appreciate the potential of quantum to make an impact on greater productivity, I believe it's now. And you would have seen the federal government's commitment to developing a quantum industry in the country, in Australia. And look, Archer is well into the fore in that picture. But really what I wanted to say here on this slide is that there has been a demonstrated commitment by the biggest economies in the world that quantum computing is going to happen. And what's important, is that at Archer, we're not playing catch up. So on that note, it's really important for me to actually go into what we're doing at Archer, what stage of development we're at. And I hope that you could appreciate that we're not doing this alone. So the most important point on this slide here is the last point, is that last dot point. And it's that our proposal, our qubit architecture, has the potential to operate at room temperature and integrate into modern day devices. And how is that so different than everybody else out there? Well, these qubits are very hard to control, they're very hard to sense, very hard to detect, very hard to measure. And these devices are very difficult to build. And to date, a lot of the different architectures or proposals have relied on cooling systems, has relied on photonics, lasers, has relied on developing very unique materials that require very sophisticated nanotechnology, very high or low pressures, all sorts of exotic science, exotic things. But I wanted to really sum it up with this slide here, which I think is probably the most important slide of my presentation. If you have a look here on the left, the silhouette is there to represent what you would probably see if you Googled quantum computing, right? It's the beautiful copper and gold looking chandelier. Now, these are the quantum computing systems that you see today. These are the beautiful, elegant cooling systems that go down to a superconducting chip that uses qubits that are generated at really low temperatures that are like, not even found in outer space, even colder than outer space. And then you have proposals where qubits could operate at room temperature, but require a physical presence again. It requires to be installed on site, needs high vacuum systems, needs photonics, again, difficult to integrate into modern electronics. And then you have this, class of device where we've dubbed quantum-powered mobile devices. And really, if you were to look ahead and say, well, what could potentially be the impact of Archer's development? Well, it's in the development of quantum-powered mobile devices. Having a qubit architecture that could potentially integrate into modern electronics. We're not trying to build the whole computer. We're trying to build the chip, and we're trying to integrate this chip for use in quantum-powered mobile devices. But I mean, what do I mean by that? QPMDs. It's no longer really a secret that quantum computing would give nations a competitive advantage. And I think you've heard nations talk about this. It's because quantum computers and machines have the potential to address all sectors dependent on computational power. Each of these sectors could benefit tremendously with the advent of advanced computing, like quantum computing, and especially QPMDs. But generally speaking, a lot of times I get asked, Mohammad, where is this stuff going to be applied? How long is it going to take? Who's going to get there first? But look, generally speaking, a consensus is emerging in the quantum economy around, applications of quantum computing at tech maturity, right? There are several computational problems which quantum machines could be beneficial. And these, several problems lead to hundreds of business use cases that are envisioned to really unlock value for end users in the coming decades, right? Let's not forget that the silicon semiconductor industry was built of 60, 70 years, right, in trillions of dollars. And for quantum computing, it's important to note that, this value is envisioned as the tech hardware matures. And this is why I continue to stress that value now in quantum computing is linked to hardware development. And the key for Archer is really at this stage of development in quantum computing, in the quantum computing industry. Indeed, it's early for everyone, right? It's not just early for Archer, it's early for everyone. Yes, we see it in the news. Yes, we see the newspaper articles in the media, but it's early. And the important thing for Archer is in positioning our technology where there are clear benefits for mobile use. And we are already working with other members of the IBM Quantum Network as a member of the IBM Quantum Network, the global invite-only quantum network, to do this, as we should be. But look, some of you still may be wondering, Archer is a small outfit. I know Mark used that word previously. For other organizations, small outfits, right? How can we do it? How can we compete, right? The reality is we're not doing it by ourselves. And we are already in partnership with an undoubted world leader in computing in IBM. Now, our focus at Archer is in building the chip and working with IBM and our other partners to demonstrate it works. I mean, this slide here, it's just there to illustrate what we see when we access real quantum computers. Yes, we have access to real quantum computers. The principal point about showing you this is to demonstrate that quantum computing is real. And if there was ever a time for me to say, build it and they will come, just ask IBM, right? I mean, over 350,000 users over the last few years, implementing billions of quantum circuits each day. It's absolutely incredible where the field is going and where it has been, and where it's come from. And I hope I hope that today I've painted a broad picture of what we do as a high-tech semiconductor company in Australia. I think you'll be surprised to learn just how many Australians there are around the world actually leading the way in quantum computing. And I know that you'll also appreciate that you can't stand still as a company. At Archer, we're constantly looking to expand our strategy, but in keeping with our main focus. And some of you may have heard of our development of our Biochip, and our Biochip technology fits in with our focus. But like I said today, I will only talk about our quantum computing technology. But briefly, these Biochip, these lab-on-chip devices are some of the most sophisticated devices in medical diagnostics, and are emerging as a platform technology. And the Biochip development at Archer is a result and an outcome of broader creative thinking at Archer. And I think it's important to also make a distinction here that we're focused on the chip, the Biochip, and not the concept of point of care. The chip itself is the paradigm. And I wanted to emphasize briefly, just before we move on, that the Biochip development doesn't come at the expense of the 12CQ chip. We're adding resources to concentrate on progressing both our technologies the way we should be, right? So in the interest of time, I know that, Mark, you have a lot of questions, but in the interest of time, in summary, what I will say is Archer is growing into a semiconductor company. That is our strategy now, and that's our strategy going forward. We have well-defined commercial roadmaps for our technologies, and we're at a point, really where we need to be. And what you'll see if you look back at our progress to date is what I believe a track record of high impact outcomes. It's not based on a single metric, right? Which is really typical. I think what you've seen today is typical of other industries. We have a lot to look forward to at Archer in the year ahead. And I'm not going to get very granular here, but we do look forward to reaching our interim milestones that are very very important in their own right, to help track our progress. But the milestones are related to our technology development, our commercial partnerships, and our IP. Our focus still remains very sharply on our quantum work and related semiconductor operations. But the recent, some of you may be following, our recent capital raising was about placing the company in a strong cash position over the next few years. And really our staff members will increase as we set out on the next stage of our development. So look, I hope I've conveyed to you today some of the work that we're doing and what Archer is all about, and how we're doing, and really how eminently worthwhile it is. And I guess on that note, thank you very much for your attention, Mark. I'll open it for questions. I know you have heaps, and we'll take it from there.
Excellent. Thank you, Mohammad. Yeah, you're right. We do have a lot of questions. I guess looking at the, and this is a personal question coming from me, I should say, looking at the different things that you're working on, what, if any, are there the R&D synergies, for instance, between the quantum computing aspect of it and the Biochip? Are there similarities where one can leverage off the other?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a multidisciplinary team here in Archer, and I know that you've come along, Mark, and you've seen the facilities you operate out of, and it becomes a lot clearer when you see everyone under the one roof, right? When we're all under the one roof and all working together. So there are skills that you can leverage from people within the Biochip team, especially around nanofabrication, with different elements of the device, especially as we work down towards reaching best-in-class capabilities around different component sizes, the different kinds of lithography that's used, and the chip manufacturing or the chip development towards manufacturing scale. So absolutely, there are synergies between the two different teams, if you want to call them, at Archer. But there are also clear differentiators, right? Quantum computing is quantum computing, and biological information processing is biological information processing.
Right. We got some questions about patents, so I'll try to bundle them up. The first one is about the Australian patent, when that is expected, and also, let me just scroll down here, how many more patents you expect to be granted at some point going forward?
Yeah, I can't speculate on when patents can be granted and the outcomes and things like this. All I could say is that it's moving, it's progressing. We're going through the prosecution process in Australia. We've done our bit, and we continue to do our bit there. It's actually really exciting to think where we are. It's taken, it took way before I joined Archer getting these patents up and running and going through the prosecution process, which can be pretty complex, right? I mean, we're talking about international jurisdictions, different laws, different customs, different ways countries do things. So that's I guess to answer that question, we are progressing forward with our prosecution and with our IP related to 12CQ in Europe and Australia and Hong Kong, which remains in that portfolio. But we obviously will continue to look to grow our IP portfolio, right? We're a technology company. I mean, that's what technology companies do. They aim to grow their IP portfolio. And this is something that is indeed part of our strategy, which is why I said, what to look forward to next year is absolutely, it's linked. It's linked to our commercialization goals and progress, and also our technology development. But the important thing to note, you need people. People generate IP, right? AI isn't there yet. So we want to, our focus moving forward as well is on, and I know you're going to ask me, Mike, around what risk is. Come on, you can ask me and I can lead into it. But, it's growing our team and getting those people that have a very high degree of intellectual excellence that's required to drive this IP forward.
All right. Can you talk a little bit about the timelines for quantum computing developing? Because we've got a couple of companies that have been working on their specific technologies for a long time. And semiconductor development, everything takes longer than you think. Can you talk a little bit about what you expect Archer's timelines to be for that?
Yeah, look, I mean, I can talk about the quantum computing field in general, and then we can talk about Archer in that context. I mean, absolutely no problem discussing that. It's no secret. I mean, if you have a look at the roadmaps of companies like IBM and others, and if you follow the reports by BCG that have been looking at the business of quantum computing and technology for many years, you see that this is not an 18-month thing. This is not a 12-month thing, right? We're in the current stage where quantum computers can do some things, right? They're pretty noisy. And I'll put that into context. Boolean logic was around for a long time, before your transistors, before your devices, before your computers, right? It just turned out that transistors were pretty cool because, one, they can convert something into an electronic signal, they can be miniaturized, scaled, and were error-proof, right? So when you use your computer, you can feel confident your computer works, right? So with quantum computing, this is not the case, right? We don't have that kind of silver bullet solution to the wide-scale use and accessibility of quantum computing. We're in an era, what is being dubbed as this noisy intermediate quantum era, right? And it's really just demonstrating a proof of concept that quantum computers can work, and they can actually be useful for something. And so the timelines have been given 5, 10, 15 years, 20 years, right? But this is not to be scared of. This is not to say that there isn't value to be added along the way. I mean, have a look at our own and other companies' trajectories over the last few years in regards to the value that they've been generating. And like I said, intimately and inherently linked to the technology, to the hardware. The hardware, we built the hardware, we built the processors because the algorithms are there, right? So people are working on quantum algorithms, people are working on quantum neural networks and different kinds of applications. But the reason why we build the quantum hardware is to run these algorithms that can then give you potential speed ups over classical computing. That's where the value lies, right? So in terms of timelines, Archer is no different than everyone else out there. I mean, what you're seeing in the media and what you're seeing with these headline kind of funding and cap raises and SPAC deals and whatever, these are years of this has come to fruition after years of development, right? Of companies that you had never heard of, people that you had never heard of, right? 5, 10, 15 years ago, that are now really bearing some fruit to what they're doing and coming out in the open and really undergoing that level of scrutiny that we go under every day.
Yeah. All right.
I hope that answers that question. I'm not Peter-patting around the bush. It's years. It's not a few months or a couple of months or 18 months to market and all this kind of stuff. You're really developing a technology that is a world first, And we can't forget that it is something that has not been built before. Anyway.
Yeah. And look, in that light, it might be hard to answer, but we have a number of questions around about the technical questions, really, about how to integrate potentially with the chip when you've got a chip, a commercially available chip, for instance, in mobile devices, and how you would, at that point in time, and this is combining two questions in one, how you would slot in with development roadmaps for existing hardware manufacturers, like mobile phone manufacturers like Apple or someone else. So, and I know, again, it's some time out, I guess, but maybe you can sort of talk about that, how you see that progressing.
Yeah, look, I can't go into too much detail without signing 170 something NDAs, right? 200 NDAs, especially when you ask how are you going to do something that taps into our IP. But there is a lot of publicly available information already, right? And without having to hear it come out of my mouth, I would encourage people listening today to have a read of our Nature Communications paper, right? Have a read of the patent specifications. There is a lot of detail in there. There is a lot of information in there, and you can, really help you draw your own conclusions. I've already said that the qubit already lends itself to being able to be integrated on board modern day electronics. It boils down to the quantum system that is within this material. It all goes down to materials, because materials are the tangible physical basis of all technology, right? Yes, there are challenges that we're going to face moving forward in how to do this. No one's ever done this before, and we're doing what we need to do now to address those issues. We've already gone out with some announcements early on to demonstrate that we've addressed some challenges that were present in other systems, for example, around qubit scalability, right? Where, questions around how you're going to position individual qubits on a silicon wafer. The fact that we can do this already is absolutely astounding. I mean, the fact that we can pick and place our qubits where we want on a silicon wafer and then start to build electrodes around our qubit. I mean, we've gone down to the level where we've picked up a single qubit and measured the conductivity across a single qubit and done this on a silicon wafer and showed that these characteristics are in line with what you would expect a qubit to undergo within a chip architecture at a very early stage of our development. So it's all there. You just got to pack it together.
Yeah, sure. And look, your approach is quite different, right, from what others have done in the past when it comes to quantum computing. So we have a question about keeping quantum states stable at room temperature. But your approach is fundamentally different. Maybe can you, at a high level, for the layperson, talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's really interesting, because you have a fundamentally different approach to doing this.
Yeah, and look, I'll go back to the material itself. The approach is using carbon. I mean, it's the field in quantum computing, and I go back to the Nature paper that was published. It's freely accessible. You can download it. You can have a read of that. What you would have noticed in quantum computing for many years is that there was this kind of materials dichotomy in the field, right? You could either have materials, so for solid-state devices, I'm not talking about other kinds of exotic systems. For solid-state devices, because this ties into your devices that you use, right? That's what they are. They're solid-state. You had this situation where if you wanted to do quantum computing with say silicon or other kinds of materials, you had to go down really low temperature, right, to stabilize that quantum information and access that quantum information. It's not me who said that. That's just the way physics works, right? It's not a matter of just turning up the dial. It's not a systematic approach where we'll just keep clunking up the thermostat until we get to room temperature. There were fundamental limitations. And then on the other hand, you had materials where you could do quantum computing at room temperature, but very difficult to integrate into electronics for whatever reason, whether it be the infrastructure around it that needed, or the material itself didn't lend itself to being integrated on board devices. And then the material that I came up with many years ago, and we tested and we showed that you can drive these coherent quantum states at room temperature. It's all there. Kind of unified that two aspects, right? You could do this qubit manipulation at room temperature at lifetimes that were viable for quantum computation and spintronics. And you also had a material that was quite easy to make, easy to handle, easy to process, and could be readily available. And at the same time, it was a material that had a very unique system, this qubit architecture. And I can't go into too much detail there, which lends itself to being integrated onboard devices. And really, it kind of unified that materials dichotomy. So yeah, quite special.
All right. And here's a question about partners. I think you talked about that a little bit. Someone's asking just if you can repeat who your partners are and what your expectations are for partnering up with others going forward.
Yeah, okay. Well, we have a long list of people we work with, and I can name a few. So we are part of the IBM Quantum Network. It is a global network made up of about 150 Fortune 500 companies, national research facilities, startups, R&D labs. So we work with IBM and members of the IBM Quantum Network. For example, with Max Kelson, another Aussie team. They're up in Queensland. They're a software. Well, they're big data and AI. They're also part of the IBM Q network. We also recently agreed to work with the Australian Institute of Machine Learning over in Adelaide. Absolutely fantastic there to focus on, like I said, those end users, right? And speaking of end users, I know, national priorities will always win. And so very happy to be, involved with the Australian Missile Corporation's, push for our national sovereign guided weapon system, missile system, right? So you can see there that there are a lot of different areas and aspects where quantum has an ability to touch upon and to be used. But for us at Archer, very early on, it's to work with partners who can help us with our development and also demonstrate that the end use applications, right? So these are two areas where I guess people are most concerned with.
Right. Okay. Well, have a whole bunch of questions. We've got time for one more. Unfortunately, time is flying today.
This is why I kept my talk short, just for the investors and shareholders listening. I didn't shrink it. I shrank it because I know they'll always get heaps of questions.
That's clever. Yeah. So last question then, Mohammed, and I think this is really interesting. Again, it's a bit early days, but when you get to the point of a commercially available chip based on your technology, what would that mean for existing chip players or the ones that are actually sort of emerging right now, like some of the ones that we're hearing from today? What does it mean if when you've got a chip based on quantum computing at room temperature? How does that distort the market basically, or disrupt, I should say?
Well, I think it will be absolutely fantastic news for the market. I mean, there's no reason why your phone needs to displace or outdo or do something else. I mean, the whole point of your phone being different to a supercomputer in the cloud is because they offer different kinds of functionality, different kinds of end use, right? So I think the ultimate goal for us at Archer and those who share our values is to make quantum computing more accessible. And so for us, at this early stage, we don't see it being something that would be frowned upon. I think it's something that would be welcomed as a potential solution to the widespread use of quantum computing. We're absolutely excited by it. Those we work with are absolutely excited by it. And think about it realistically. I mean, to consider that you're only ever going to have one kind of quantum computer doing one kind of problem solving, I think is a bit naive, right? We need to take the lessons from computing that we've seen to date. And we also have to acknowledge the pragmatism and reality of quantum computing, that it's not going to solve everything. It will work hand in hand with the computers and processes that we have today. But at the same time, there will most likely be quantum computers or quantum computing devices or machines that are built for different kinds of end uses.
All right, excellent. Well, unfortunately, we have to leave it there, Mohammed. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's been very insightful. And we'll keep a close eye on announcements because I think this is an extremely exciting space to be in. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me. Bye, everyone.